it makes a lot of sense to me that, first of all, exercise helps anxiety. How does it help? It's not through burning calories. We can burn calories a lot of ways. Okay. It helps exercise because you have an anandamide boost. We improve the synaptic communication. You have a drop in anxiety. So we have a lot of data that shows that the consumption of cannabinoids will have a similar effect.
Hey, fitness friends, welcome back to the Future of Fitness podcast and interview series. This is your host, Eric Malzone, and this is episode number 119. I get to talk to Don Moxley. What a gem. Thank you, Ben Reuter, for finding this guy and connecting me with him. And you can check out his podcast interview on Ben Reuter's show as well. So on the Moving to Live podcast. But I guess you could call this the cannabis episode for the Future of Fitness, right? So as Don so eloquently put during the interview, referring to me, I'm not naive to cannabis in any way. It's been part of my life for quite some time. And I can tell you right now, I'm still baffled by the stigma, both socially, legislatively, legally, all of those things. What's the problem? What is the problem, right? There's so many benefits to be derived from it. And he talks from an athletic perspective, how it's evolving there for recovery and a lot of the health benefits thereof. And I could say, just from personal experience with those close to me, myself, and studies I've read, that it's nothing to be feared. It's something to be aware of and studied and almost in awe of at times. And just, we need to understand it, right? And the role of the cannabinoid system, that's innately in us, right? That's what other people think. It's actually in us, you guys, right? It's completely natural in our bodies, cannabinoids. So anyway, listen up. Let me know what you think. And I'd love to hear from you after the show. You can reach me at ericmalzone@fitnessprofessionalonline.com. So speaking of fitness professionals or health professionals, this show is brought to you by certifiedcoursecreation.com. So do you have a great idea? Do you have a wealth of knowledge in a particular area? And you need to get it out there, right? You're probably tired of trading your time for money. Does this sound familiar at all? Well, creating an accredited online certification could be the best thing you ever do for yourself, right? Not only are they highly lucrative or can be highly lucrative, it's a way to get your knowledge out there. It's a way to build a legacy. It's a way to firmly position yourself as an expert in the field. So I think it's a no-brainer. I think it's worth checking out. And if you go to certifiedcoursecreation.com and you check it out, you can book a time and kind of do a discovery call. See if you have it in you. See if it's something worthwhile. And it probably is. So do yourself a favor and go check out certifiedcoursecreation.com. Lastly, before we get on to the interview, so more further ado, I want to read a review from Chris Otson, who says, highly recommend this podcast. Highly recommend for anyone interested in learning more about the world of fitness from the perspective of someone who has seen all sides of it. Give it a listen. Thank you, Chris Otson. I've known Chris for a while and really appreciate him coming by and dropping a review. You should also check out his photography on Instagram, Christopher Otson. Yeah, so now, without further ado, let's get on to episode number 119 with Don Moxley. Enjoy the show. Let me know what you think. Talk to you soon. All right, we're live. Don, welcome.
Thanks. Looking forward to being here.
Yeah, there's so many things we can talk about. And I want to thank, before we get started, Ben Reuter for connecting us from Moving to Live podcast. And I listened to your show on his show, and I was so intrigued, man. I think you have so much to offer, and I think it's so critical in the timing of everything that's going on with different legislation that's coming through, to advancement of technology in the HRV area and all of this. And you're smack in the middle of it all. So this is going to be a really great educational piece for fitness professionals out there. So Don, I don't want to steal too much of your thunder. If you could just give us some background, a little bit of a short bio on you.
Well, my background is I'm an exercise physiologist. I've been working in academics for almost 30 years now. Started teaching, got out of grad school in the mid 80s, and right away started in high tech sports performance. That one of my earliest clients was a guy by the name of Brad Sellers and Dennis Hobson, and at the time they were Ohio State grads that played for the Chicago Bulls, and they played for the Jordan Bulls back then. And I got to work with Al Vermeil Yeah. Al was the strength coach for the Chicago Bulls back then. And Al, when I started working with these guys, I went up and met him, and he had this thing that was called a Vermeil time machine, which was essentially this Atari computer that was set on top of this circuited box that had optical switches and switch pads, and it fed into a printer that a fax style printer. And so literally I started doing I scrounged together $5,000 to be able to buy one of these things back then, and I started doing some testing back then, because I've always felt that you need authentic evidence to make good decisions. And that was this was the first time I used a piece of technology. And back then I got to do some work with the Ohio State women's volleyball team back then, did some testing. The coach back then was a really good progressive coach, Jim Stone. And this was one of my first real team experiences. And we wound up sweeping the Big Ten, finished second in the country that year. But most importantly, I consider this one of my most valuable coaching accomplishments, is that every one of my starters was available for every practice.
Wow.
Every one of my players was available for every game. Okay, so and at the end of the day, the coach has got to recruit racehorses, and it's our job to keep the racehorses in the race. But at the same time, if you're doing something, you need to make sure that there's a measurable output. I think this is what determines the difference between Joe Bag of Donuts trainer and a professional. That someone, if you're a real pro, someone should be able to see a measurable difference from the work that you're doing. Mm-hmm. So that's really when I really started then, again, remember 1980s, kind of when the personal computers were just coming out, IBM was just rolling. This is borderline Stone Age. So that technology kept advancing. I was running a lab in a community college in Columbus. It was called Columbus State Community College, and we put a technology in there that was called Body Age at the time. We bought it from a company out in Albuquerque and called Health First. And Polar, the heart rate monitor company, bought Health First. And so they came after me, and I had a chance to go work in the technology sector for Polar, which was just a great experience. And at the time, we were still measuring heart rate with two fingers on our carotid, which is, as I explained, it's like a NASCAR driver trying to tell his speed by counting telephone poles around the track. And all of a sudden, I'm thrown into the middle of this phenomenal technology, space. And I'm like, holy mackerel, how do you train? And once you use good technology, you wonder how you trained without it. Yeah. Because it just really gives you the ability to slide into that perfect spot. So spent a few years working with Polar, had a great experience there, picked up a bunch of information. And it was Polar that really first tried to commercialize using heart rate variability in their products. A lot of people didn't know it was there. They wouldn't call it HRV. They would call it like Own Zone and Own Cal and Own this and Own that. And but at the end of the day, they were looking at RMSSD. Again, Polar's a Finnish company. They have a lot of Russian influence in their technology up there, and HRV is ultimately discovered by the Russian space program. So that's when I was first introduced to HRV. At the time, my daughter had been born, and my job at the time had me on an airplane every week. So I didn't want to be that dad. So I had developed a technology at that point. And I think most of your listeners will be familiar with a product called Tendo. It's that you measure bar speed to measure power. And I had a Tendo unit that I was working with and figuring some things out. I've been lucky enough to have a good relationship with Lou Simmons from Westside Barbell from back in the early 80s when I was training. And I was down with Lou, and he showed me the Tendo, and I wound up getting one and thought, wow, this is, when all of a sudden you can measure the quality of each rep of a strength movement. And that was significant. And so at that time, I hired an engineer. I had this big fat bonus check from Polar, and I hired an engineer to make my own Tendo unit that we fed into a computer, so I didn't have to transfer the numbers by hand. had a concept. We tried to commercialize it with a high-tech fitness facility, which ultimately, was not successful. But it was a great learning experience. So, migrated out of that, back into academics and taught for a long time. And then was, the Ohio State wrestling program came back to me. They had a new coach. And if you listen to any of my other podcasts, you'll hear the story of 2015 that, Ohio State at the time had a wrestler by the name of Logan Stieber that had run 3 national titles, was on his way back to win his 4th. And they had a freshman class that included the eventual first 3 wrestlers to be 4-time All-Americans in a single class at a single school. One of those guys went on to win an Olympic gold medal in Rio. And so we worked with a wrestler on that team that was struggling a little bit, did some HRV work, was able to pick up some issues. We modified 9 workouts on this guy, and he went from where we weren't sure he'd score any points to where he's an All-American and helped that team win a national title. So then embedded with Ohio State for about 3 or 4 years, wound up partnering when I was at Ohio State with the Air Force Research Lab out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which got me a bunch of resources. And then in my last year at Ohio State, we measured about 3.5 million data points on this wrestling team, and got to the point with HRV that we could predict All-American status of our wrestlers prior to the first day of the tournament. Before they wrestled their first match, I could have told you who was going to be an All-American and who wouldn't. So, we had a lot of success there. The special operations group from the military, not just Air Force, but the entire special operations group, took a look at the program. And then I had this great opportunity to come and change industries again. That a friend of mine that I'd worked with a wearables company had moved into the cannabis space. And we had been having conversations, and we know that cannabis can have a positive effect on the recovery status of an athlete. We knew that. I don't know that we knew why. I know I didn't know why. I couldn't explain it. So when I was invited to come into this space, I jumped in it. And, so I'm working for a company in Florida that's part of a big, we have the company that owns us. We have assets in 11 states, and so became part of a much bigger company.
Wow.
So I sell weed in Florida now.
Yeah. So full circle. No,
yeah.
So, yeah.
A lot of science, and I sell weed now.
Yeah. That's good. So I have to ask, because if I'm listening to this, how, if you can explain it to us in terms we can understand, but how did you know if people are going to be All-Americans? Like, what did the data tell you?
Yeah, it basically boiled down to their RMSSD status. So the root mean square of similar differences, that's one of the HRV mechanisms that you get. And having measured wrestlers over several years, we saw it in 2016 when Kyle won his gold medal, that, he was a national titleist that year too. And we had some early RMSSD data, and we started to see some trends, and it looked like, I had wrestlers that made All-American, and I had wrestlers that didn't make All-American, and there was a distinct line. And it looks like, and back then we hypothesized, and it showed up in the next 2 years of data. It looks like if you don't have a wrestler that has an RMSSD going into the tournament of about 75 milliseconds, they probably won't make All-American. Your ability to make All-American. Listen, you have the top 10% of the wrestlers in the country qualifying for that tournament.
Right.
Actually, it's more than that. The top 10%, there's about 800 wrestlers in D1. 80 of them make All-American. So you've got 320 that qualify for the tournament. So about 32 guys per weight class. So you have a lot of talent. You have a lot of guys that train hard. Training hard's not the issue anymore. That used to be a determining factor years ago. It's not anymore. Everybody trains hard. The question is can you recover between bouts in a manner that gives you the ability to compete clear through the tournament? So this was the work that we did that became very clear, is that if you don't have a high enough recovery index, you won't make All-American. So everything we did then was about getting that recovery index to a place that would support that. We had 8 guys that did it and 2 that didn't. So, that was very enlightening, and so, for instance, the things that we used to move RMSSD when we were there were, sensory deprivation floating and mindfulness techniques. So we would use tools like that. We floated that team 140 times in a season. Okay. Floating works. And at the same time, obviously we're not using cannabis with that team because it's illegal in the NCAA. But I have friends in the pros that were telling me stories, and we're seeing data. And now that I'm in the middle of the industry, you know what? Cannabinoids move RMSSD. Cannabinoids change your central nervous system status. It'll flip you from sympathetic to parasympathetic. So that's it was simply looking at the data, but it took a lot of determination. It took a lot of work to get the data. The data did not come easy. It took me standing over guys in practice every day, and some of them just hating me because they didn't want to put the hardware on. They didn't want to do it. So part of that's my fault. With that athlete, I obviously didn't communicate the value of the data well enough.
Yeah. How could you?
Well, it's honest. We have to. I used to tell people when I opened my fitness facility, what I told them is I said, our challenge is, listen, if I could put you in a workout and at the end of the workout you finished, the machine said, good job, and printed a $50 bill. Mm-hmm. How many workouts would you miss?
None.
You'd be there. Yeah. So our challenge is creating a $50 workout. The value, someone has to perceive what they're doing at that level or some level in between. So we listen, 3.5 million data points. I was obviously getting someone to measure something.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it just took a lot of work to get that. But when you have the data, then you can make decisions. Yeah. And being partnered with the Air Force Research Lab at Wright Pat, I can't tell you how valuable that was, to have a group of high-level analysts helping us analyze the data. And at the same time, I had a guy at Ohio State from the Fisher College of Business that was helping me do things, that we were collecting most of this data into spreadsheets. So we're managing a lot of data in spreadsheets. So most spreadsheets won't hold that much data. So you got to go in multiples and bring them together. So I had an intern, Zach, that was just a rock star. So if you're in this business and if you're a sport coach, I have a huge amount of respect. You've got to get into your business schools and get these kids to come help you because you have to have the data to make decisions.
Yeah. Wow, what an interesting, and this is probably, this information is applicable to all sports, right? Probably any kind of high-level performance from entrepreneurship to, like I said, athletics or special ops, all of this.
Yeah, not just high level. Remember, everything we're talking about is in the human nervous system, okay? So if you're alive, your nervous system is contributing to that. Yeah. So it's obvious, we see the application at the elite sport level. It's easy to see, but there are people that suffer every day with post-traumatic stress. There are people that suffer with anxiety, that may not understand why or what's going on. If you can put a indicator on it, if you can put some kind of a number on it that they say, if I change my behavior, the number changes, then you start to get some behavior. You've got, ultimately, I go back to I think it's one of the most important books I ever read, and it's Flow, F-L-O-W, the Psychology of the Optimum Experience. Yep. And Csikszentmihalyi talks about 7 characteristics of the flow experience. Challenging activity that requires skill. That's, we all have that, but it's rich in athletics. But clear goals and feedback, the number 2 element that goes in that. So the puddles of sweat next to your bike are not clear goals and feedback. The scale is not clear goals and feedback. You've got to have variables, and you've got to have variables that you can trust and are dependable and repeatable and reliable. The 3 R's of any research. So this is the reason, as the more you work on this, listen, if you're training and you're not wearing a heart rate monitor, you've probably got room to improve. Yeah. If you want to optimize lifestyle, if stress is an issue in what you do, you should be looking at HRV. You should be looking at what your central nervous status is. Are you waking up ready? Are you, I do a lecture where I draw, I put a piece of paper up, and I draw a line horizontally on it, and that line represents homeostasis. And then I draw a box on top of the line, and the width of the box is the duration of the workout. The height of the box is the intensity of the workout. And what goes in the box is your mode, whether it's cardio or strength or skill or whatever. But so that's the variable. And then when I do that lecture, I go ahead and I draw a diagonal line from the bottom of the box down, okay? Because you don't get stronger with stress. You get weaker with stress. With recovery, you get stronger. So, but the question is that what is that angle of that? What is the angle of recovery? That if you've been traumatized, this is the shitty data. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys have to endure some type of sexual molestation act by the time they're 18. 1 in 6 girls are either raped or attempted raped. Okay. Those are traumatic events. Okay. And the body responds to that by becoming vigilant. Okay. And eventually becomes hypervigilant. This is the foundation of post-traumatic stress. And we can explain it. There's this great mouse study I came across that looks at the role of anandamide, which is an endocannabinoid. It's a cannabinoid your body produces, and the amygdala, the fear sensing portion of your brain. So we see mice that are fear conditioned. There's a drop of anandamide in their amygdala. So it looks like that hypervigilance is cut. That's the evolutionary response. So, if you're born into a rattlesnake pit, the only way you survive is being hypervigilant. So that's a good adaptive response. Yeah. The problem is once you get out of the rattlesnake pit, everything looks like a rattlesnake. Instead of being a tiger, it's a paper tiger. And we live in a society full of paper tigers. That quote comes from a good friend of mine. It's a pain doc, Dr. Ron Garbo, who's done a great job in this space. But that hypervigilance holds you in that sympathetic state. And you have to intentionally recover. Again, that's another Dr. Ron Garbo quote. Intentional recovery to break this. But the question is, what are you using as your indicators, your dashboard? Am I doing good? Am I doing bad? Is it working? You've got to be able to put an indicator on that. And that's where some of the great HRV stuff comes from.
Yeah. So I have a ton of HRV equipment. I started with Omega back in like 2000, whatever that was, 12. So I've tested them all. I had recently had, Joel Jameson on with Morpheus, and we talked about that.
Yeah, love Joel.
Yeah, I like his. I think his is, from my experience so far, the best I've had. But I'm not a training athlete anymore. I don't need quite as much, as robust as that is. So I'm curious, if you had a recommendation, 2 recommendations actually. One for the average Joe and Jane who just wants to maintain their stress levels, know when to push, the family of 3, demanding job, that type person. And then the high-end athlete, is there 2 different, or is there one tool that you would recommend, or a couple of tools you would recommend?
No. So I just had this conversation with the guy that replaced me at Ohio State. Listen, I love Omega Wave and I love what they do, but there's a pretty high hassle factor with it. And frankly, I personally have not been able to gain value from their DC current potential stuff. The electrode on the head and the hands. What I found is that the RMSSD, the HRV data is very predictable. It is very good, and it's a great tool for that.
Awesome.
But it's a relatively high hassle factor. Right now, when someone asks me about an HRV measurement tool at a sport level, I'll usually point you towards First Speed. The First Beat system, particularly when you can integrate, First Beat does a nice job of, they have a on-demand 5 minutes called a quick recovery test that you can do as an individual or as a team, which is pretty good. I've used it a lot. I like it. But they also have what's called a bodyguard, which is something that I can record every heartbeat for about 3 days. So I can see sleep. I can see the rest of your workouts. So at a high intensity level right now, my recommendation, and listen, I've used a lot of these. I don't get paid by anybody. Right now, First Beat's my recommendation at a sport level. Okay. I've spent a lot of time looking at, and I'll tell you, Elite HRV, the guys down there at Elite HRV, and they have a finger sensor that I've been using that's pretty slick. It uses the photoplasmography, but they've worked out algorithms on this. And so for me, who's not a competitive athlete anymore, you know what? I've gotten some really interesting data out of using the Elite HRV app and their Core Sense sensor. It's a really dependable, really good place to be.
Awesome.
And pretty affordable.
Yeah. And what's the price point on it roughly?
Well, I think, you know what? I don't know.
People can look it up. Yeah,
but I think that sensor's less than $100.
That's great.
And I think the app is free.
That's great.
And you can upgrade into more data and stuff like that. And they have team capabilities. I've worked with their team capabilities. Very nice, do a very nice job. And Jason Moore, who ramrods that outfit, smart guy, doing a nice job with his algorithm development. And they've got it figured out. It's nice.
Yeah. Well, and imagine a company like that too. The smart thing is to get it into as many hands as possible, because then you start collecting data, right?
They like the data, and it looks like this freemium model is the thing to do. But I guess if I were to leave a message, if you train and you don't own a chest transmitter yet, well, you should stop whatever you're doing and you should go buy one. That there may not. When I worked for Polar, I was always trying to get the marketing department to do a commercial or do an ad where we showed all these athletes in their gear, but then I wanted to show them all naked with just a heart rate transmitter on, saying that this is where you start getting dressed, and they would never do it, but this is literally. Good workouts start with this date, with this information.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get the photoplasmography devices, whether it's on the back of the wrist or something else. And I just don't have a great solution. There's some of them are good. And if you're just getting started and you want to buy one of those wrist-based sensors, I've not had any luck with the Apple one, by the way.
Yeah.
But some of the other ones are close. But you know what? Just put the freaking chest band on. And because that data is 99% of a wired EKG, that's really good information. And Polar now, you can use their free app and their transmitter. So for an $80 investment, you're getting what we were charging $500 for back when I was working for them, because we didn't. It's before smartphones. Again, back in the dinosaur era, we had. I remember bag phones. So when smartphones started, that was a big deal. But
yeah, I had a one with a phone with a shoulder strap.
Yeah, I had one of those too.
Yeah, that was back in the day. Okay, so I feel like you actually have really done an amazing job of kind of defining what the stress means, like what that means for recovery, and why recovery is probably the biggest metric that we're not paying enough attention to when it comes to performance, right? So tie this into cannabis, man. How are you seeing this? What was that aha moment that made you jump from this type of technology into the cannabis? Was there something that sparked your interest? And then give us...
Well, what got me looking was, I think I said, I had a friend that I worked with at another company out west, and it was a wearables wellness company. And we both exited that company about the same time. And I came back to Ohio State, and that's when I started my work at Ohio State, my last set of work. But he went into the cannabis space. And he sent me a note one day, and he said, "So tell me about cannabis and HRV." And I thought, this is interesting. So I started to do some research. And you know what? There's some papers out there. But then you start asking around and you find out there's some of these guys that work in the pros that have been looking at this. And when you look at HRV and elite athletes, what happens a lot of times, the athletes, and this is warriors and athletes, this is all the elite human groups, they'll get stuck, either sympathetic or parasympathetic. The system just, they're not in that nice sine wave, you know? So the question is, how do you get them unstuck? Well, there's some pros that we're talking about the fact that I've got some guys who will go out on a bender and come back fixed. And I'm like, okay, interesting. And then again, you start to dig into the papers a little bit and you look at HRV and cannabis, and there's some decent studies in this. Now that I'm in the space, when you understand the role of endocannabinoids and exogenous cannabinoids, when you look at, there's 2 or 3 ways this can hit that I can explain right now. Yeah. That first of all, inflammation's an issue. Okay, when you're training hard and you're going after it, you're going to have an inflammatory response. Well, cannabis is a really good anti-inflammatory that particularly targets the COX-2 enzyme, not the COX-1, goes after the COX-2. And this doesn't have to be THC-based cannabis. This can be predominantly CBD-based, cannabidiol cannabis products. So great anti-inflammatory, number 1. Number 2, this was new to me. Okay, so I get out of grad school in 1986. 1992, 1993, Raphael McCoolum discovers the endocannabinoid system. So we didn't even know about it, let alone teach it back then. So we now know about this thing called a CB1 or a CB2 receptor. We know about the enzymatic, whether it's NAPE, NAP, or whether it's FAAH, the enzyme that breaks down the endocannabinoid. And then you have the actual ligand itself, whether it's an anandamide or 2-AG or any of these. But what we see is that in the presence of exogenous cannabinoids, you see a decrease in the FAAH degradation of the endocannabinoids in your system. Okay, so consuming an exogenous cannabinoid gives you the ability to hold on to your endocannabinoids longer. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, why is that important? Well, when you have synaptic communication, when you have 2 nerves talking to each other, okay, so one nerve achieves a threshold and essentially fires, and it dumps a neurotransmitter into the synaptic space. That neurotransmitter goes across, the second nerve picks it up, and it'll eventually activate that nerve. But the other thing that happens is that there's communication that goes from nerve 2 to nerve 1. Okay, that communication says, hey, I got your transmitter, stop sending. Okay, that communications takes place with endocannabinoids, with an anandamide. So if you have, and there's a researcher by the name of Dr. Ethan Russo who has suggested that perhaps we have a chronic anandamide deficiency, a chronic endocannabinoid deficiency that we may need to support with exogenous sources. So I'm going to go down a different rabbit hole real quick. So I want to back up a minute. So where do endocannabinoids come from? Well, they come from the metabolism of omega-6 fats, arachidonic acid, and that's what eventually becomes anandamide. So we know that takes place in persistence hunting animals. So humans, dogs, things like that. We know that when humans exercise, there's an increase of anandamide. There's an increase of that endocannabinoid. Okay, and it's when you take a look at what causes the runner high, it's probably more a responsibility of the endocannabinoid than it is the dopamine or the serotonin. Okay, it's the anandamide boost. So now I do another lecture where I put 2 pictures of orca. I put a picture of an orca in captivity and an orca in the wild. And the orcas in captivity, if you look at them, their dorsal fins bend over. Okay, so not all of them, a lot of them. Okay, and when you look at orcas in the wild, their dorsal fin is largely straight. Not all of them, most of them. Okay, so what we know is that when we put an orca in an aquarium, there's not enough environmental force from living in the aquarium for that orca to express its DNA with a straight dorsal fin. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, we take this another step. If you look at the old zoos, Okay. Old zoos used to be concrete block walls with a metal cage, and the animals were stuck in this cage, and they would get manic. They would get digestive problems. They wouldn't reproduce, and they had a lifespan of about 3.5 years. When you take these zoo animals and you put them in an enriched environment, then all of a sudden they start reproducing, they eat, they get along, they don't have the digestive issues. So the environment changes the animal's response. It loses the anxiety. Okay, so the question that I pose is, what is the effect of us going from our house aquarium to our car aquarium to our work aquarium? And every time, and the reason I do this, when you go to your house, look out the window and tell me who's the fish. Okay, when you get in your car, look out the window and tell me who's the fish. Same thing at work. Okay, so we've created an environment that limits movement, that limits the thing that drives the increase of anandamide, which improves synaptic. And it makes sense. If you have a low synaptic retrograde communication system, well, does the body cause anxiety? Well, probably, because in a normal hunter-gatherer environment, anxiety makes you get up and move. Okay? Now we live in aquariums. We can't get up and move unless you're doing it mindfully. So as I look at this whole endocannabinoid response, and again, when you look at the change of the environment that we live in, it makes a lot of sense to me that, first of all, exercise helps anxiety. How does it help? It's not through burning calories. We can burn calories a lot of ways. Okay. It helps exercise because you have an anandamide boost. We improve the synaptic communication. You have a drop in anxiety. So we have a lot of data that shows that the consumption of cannabinoids will have a similar effect. There was a point in our time where we took a bunch of humans and we stuffed them on a boat and we put them on the ocean with enough food to get from Europe to the North America. Okay. And when those humans showed up in North America or in the Caribbean islands, they showed up with sores in their mouth. Okay. Because there wasn't enough citric acid in the food that you could store it across the ocean with to prevent scurvy. Okay. So the question is, how do you fix scurvy? Well, you get the right part of your diet. You get citric acid in your diet and it fixes it. Well, that's where we started discovering micronutrients and vitamins and how minerals work and things like that. Yeah. Well, it looks to me like cannabis could be, and when we look at it, and cannabis isn't the only product with cannabinoids. There's cannabinoids in a lot of other plants. They're just very dense in cannabis. But when we start to look at nutritional supplementation and we look at the lifestyle that we have going from aquarium to aquarium, when we look at the limited movement that we have, when we look at the fact that we're surrounding ourselves with paper tigers, okay, so we're, again, hunter-gatherers only had to deal with the tiger for a few seconds, okay? There's a reason why your ATP system only lasts for about 15 seconds, because that's probably all you need to do to get away from the tiger, okay? If it was only 10 seconds, your lunch, you didn't get to reproduce. But if you made it out, that's the evolutionary process. But once you finished your tiger experience, you went and climbed up in a tree and you took a nap. Okay. You went into recovery. Okay. When you're hunter gathering, when you're out walking, when you're doing persistence hunting, okay, you're getting rewarded with the anandamide. You're getting rewarded with the endocannabinoid that keeps you hunting. That's the reason you're able to win, and that's the reason you're able to get the food. The guy that didn't get the rewards, like, screw this isn't good. The guy that got the rewards, like, no, I'm going to get the food and I'll keep going. One of them reproduced, the other one didn't. So I think a lot of these things come together, and when you look at it in this stress, sympathetic, parasympathetic paradigm, and you start to look at performance athletics as well as just performance human behavior, whether you're an executive or a teacher or anything else, being able to drive your recovery is a really, really intentional recovery. And again, I go back to my friend Ron Garbo. He was a teammate of mine, and he's a great pain management doc. That intentional recovery is the process. Right now we haven't. The Amish don't exercise. The Amish go out and work every day. Okay. So they don't need planned exercise. We have to do intentional exercise. Okay. Because of our aquarium. We also need, it looks like based on the stress that goes on and all these different things, we need intentional recovery too, because we've limited our environment so much.
Wow. So, okay. The rubber meets the road here in what way? So, if I actually have a stressful occupation, I'm an entrepreneur,
Sure.
Starting multiple businesses at once and, do a lot of travel. And actually, what's funny about it is I came off a long week of vacation, which was kind of vacation. It was 5 days of skiing with a good amount of, having fun with my friends, and came back to a ton of work, right? And yesterday I went to the gym and I picked up the barbell and I started doing some cleans. And I was like, you know what? This just doesn't feel light.
Right.
Very heavy. And I knew through my, luckily through my acquired knowledge of like what stress means, I'm like, okay, today's a day, good day to back off. And maybe I'll just do a quick, EMOM set, some push-ups and some pull-ups and light cleans. Right. Now you combine that with all my other stress loading, right? And I call it the stress bucket. Like the stress is stress, right? Whatever it comes from, you can only handle so much.
Right.
So I think people being aware, right, of what they're mindful. Yes. Huge. Right. Through the technology, just through simply even being aware of what they're doing, the mindfulness you're talking about. Now, how do we use the research now and the understanding of cannabis and all the derivatives? What do we start doing? How do we start utilizing this?
Well, listen, I think everything starts with a measure. Mm-hmm. Okay. Otherwise you're throwing shit at the wall. Yep. So, having the right measure is critical. To contribute to your previous statement, we, one of the first years that we had a comprehensive program with the team, so we're measuring them. We start wrestling in October and November. We get through December. We usually kick them loose right around Christmas. They come back just after New Year's, and we would roll right into our Big Ten season right after New Year's. So it was big time. And inevitably the team comes back with this listen, they've been resting for 5 days. We're ready to go hard. Well, the first year we did this, we get the numbers back, and the first day numbers, I'm like, they're the worst numbers I measured all year. So the guy, and literally each day they improved. And I thought, well, holy mackerel, is that, so we have our stress that we designed, but what we figured out is that family stress is the worst. It's the most aggressive stress. Okay. And so literally the second year of that, we started changing the process. So instead of just burying them day one back, we had to look at recovery kind of stuff day one back so that we could get in and start to get that routine. Because listen, if they're coming back from holiday and their angle of recovery is here instead of here and it's steep, you know what? I can't bury you 5 days in a row there. Okay. Or else I'll break you. So that family stress was a really interesting discovery. And the more I looked into it with my team, the more it became even more dominant. But to go back and answer your question, listen, do you measure your citric acid or your niacin levels on a daily basis? Now, we've got that figured out to where you take a supplement, you figure out works for you. But I take my vitamin supplement at night when I take magnesium to go to bed. That's when mine goes in. I don't measure. But I am paying attention to my stress levels, and mainly because I'm a dork, and I'm studying it all. And I told a group, I'm just a geek. I mean, I want to make data-driven decisions.
Yeah.
So it starts, listen, you can prophylactically start to use CBD or start to use products like that. But ultimately it comes down to your ability to figure out what your rhythm is. Where are you? And this is not single factorial that, did you have a good night's sleep? Did you have a fight with your girlfriend or your mate? Did you have a fight? Is there something going on at work? There's a lot of things that come into play on this. We started the call and I told you, I had a very distressing phone call with my insurance company. I'm not a State Farm insurance fan right now. I'm trying to figure out a way to not give them my money. So with that, I have to understand that's part of that's part of the bucket. And when you wake up in the morning, you got to make a decision. This is from training our guys. This was one of the big parts, is that we a lot of times, if I had my way, I would have gotten 2 HRV measurements a day. I would have gotten one right when they woke up in the morning, and I would have gotten one right before they started practice. Because the one in the morning tells me, how did they recover from the previous day? Where are we? And if I get them right before practice, I can answer the question, are they ready for the bucket of stress I've got prepared for them right now? And so you can make that call. You can pull, you can push, you can pull. Ironically, and it's probably not irony, but it's certainly exciting. I never had to tell my coach to back off. Okay. When you get an intentional recovery program in place, we always had bandwidth for training. Okay. So this was pretty exciting. So I never went to the coach and said, "Nah, you got to go easy." And I think this is what coach's biggest fear, that some dork with a clipboard and a computer is going to come tell them that he has to change the way he trains. I never had to do that. I was able to go to the coach and say, "This guys are ready. Here's the bandwidth." And I could say, "You can go harder if you want." And in fact, there was a lot of days and the coach is like, "No, we don't need to go harder. I got what I needed. We're good." And so we're walking away with gas in the tank. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. So we kind of established some metrics for people to check out too, right? I'm going to check out First Beat, and they can start seeing the recovery going. So if let's say, I'm starting to see a rhythm in my life, right? I'm starting to see what my stressors are. I'm starting to get an idea of when I'm at my best, maybe when I should be supplementing with a cannabis or a CBD product. How do I start venturing into that area? I mean, I'll be completely honest too, like we talked about before, I'm I'm not new to cannabis and marijuana. It's been part of my life.
You're not naive.
Yeah, I'm not naive, right? So I know a lot from personal experience and experimentation, for a long time. A lot of people don't. There's still, the stigma behind it. I just bought my parents in their early 80s, their first batches of CBD. And, my dad has tremors in his hands, and it reduced by 50%, span. Right. So there's a lot to it, but I think it's still misunderstood. It's still seen as snake oil a little bit. Right.
Well, it can be.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Right. Yeah. So what do we need to know? How do we start incorporating that into recovery and in our everyday lives?
I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to ask you to make a note to ask me about the Aura ring before we're done.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. So getting into cannabis. So let's do Cannabis 101 from this standpoint, that cannabis plants come in a whole continuum. It's not like apple trees. There are apple trees, you have Fujis, you have Galas, and you work your way down to Granny Smiths. So the cannabis is the same way. There's lots of varieties. Now, the variety we typically put on a continuum where one end is very high THC, and it's usually low CBD in that variety. And the other variety on the other end is very high CBD and very low THC. Okay, so that's your continuum. Now, the federal government has said cannabis with THC below 0.3%, we can call that hemp. Okay, so you'll hear people talk about hemp-based CBD. All that is cannabis CBD that's low in THC, and we can call it hemp. And according to the Farm Bill, with the Farm Bill that just passed, that is legal to grow, to process, to go across state lines. You're good to go with that. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some enforcement mechanisms that are not looking at it the same way, but you need to be smart. But for the most part, I don't mind getting on an airplane with hemp-based CBD in my bag. I'm not worried about it. Now, 0.3% THC and higher, we typically refer to this as cannabis. So this is the stuff that's controlled by state law. Okay. Now, you're in California, and California is a rec state. So anyone, I think it's 18 and over, can go in and can buy the entire spectrum of these products. We're in Florida. I'm in Florida where it's medically approved. If you want to consume to the left of the 0.3, the cannabis, you have to go to a physician and get a license, and the physician has to make a recommendation. Then you can come to a dispensary like I work for now, and you can make a purchase. But it's got to be done with a medical diagnosis and a license.
Right.
But even in Florida, if you want to buy hemp-based CBD, you can. That's legal here because we call it hemp and it's there. So, that's kind of a Cannabis 101 primer to start with. So here's your next problem with CBD. I can go out and change the oil in my car. I can take what comes out of my car, put it in bottles, call it CBD, and sell it, and there's no one tracking what I do. Okay? So you need to pay attention to what your source is. Okay. And it's not just, is it CBD or not, but where it comes from, because cannabis is a really powerful phytoremediating plant that if you plant cannabis in a brown field, it'll suck up all the heavy metals. It'll suck up all the junk. And that's what's going to get extracted. Okay. So you need to be able to get your product from someplace where there's a certificate of authenticity where it comes from, so that you know that it's been tracked, okay? And there's good companies all over the country that do this. So know where you're getting it from. Buying CBD from the guy on the corner, you could, and in fact, there's been more than one study. There's been many studies where they've gone in and bought CBD samples from all these different sources. Literally, if they buy 100, 99 of them are junk. There's either no CBD or there's THC or there's just no control. So paying attention where you get this product from is important. And so you're looking for what's called that COA, that certificate of authenticity, that someone's tracked the process and it's been tested. So that's the first thing that you do.
And Don, is that found like on their website? Is it found within each unique unit of oil?
Yeah, typically when this is done correctly, every batch is tested. So when we grow a plant, we grow it, we extract it, we create our batch oil. That then a sample out of that goes and gets tested, and that's what defines the rest that what we sell. When you look at our website, it's going to say there's a certain amount of CBD, there's a certain amount of THC, and it's coming from that batch testing. From our standpoint, we have to document from seed to sale. Okay, so we plant seeds and pop moms. Okay, so all of our production plants are cloned. Okay, so we pop a mom, we start to cut clones off of her. Those goes into seed pods, and as soon as those root and become functional plants, we put a label on them, so they get tracked clear through the system. Okay, all the way to the point to where they grow, they flower, we pull them out, they dry. Once they dry, they get ground up. So all those numbers go into a batch. The batch gets extracted. That's tracked. The oils are tracked. So that entire process is completely visible and completely auditable. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And a good hemp producer will do the exact same thing. Again, it's the same plant. It's just, one's a Granny Smith, the other one's a Fuji.
Yep.
So yeah, and so typically you go to a website. There's usually a link there. So if you click on that link, you'll see the testing information, and so that's kind of where you start.
Awesome.
And someone who's consuming. If you know someone who's consuming, what's crazy about this industry? Okay, over 50% of the population now have consumed cannabis personally. At some point in time.
Yeah.
Okay. Bill Clinton smoked but didn't inhale. Well, he counts. Okay.
Yeah. Count Bill.
So there's a lot of knowledge that when you finally ask, they say, well, I get mine here, and this is where I see the documentation and things like that. And again, you just want to stay away from the motor oil. You want to stay away from that situation where this is not something. And you know what? There was just a big bust down in Miami not long ago where they busted a bunch of cannabis that was laced with carfentanil. So when you're buying on the street, you have that risk. listen, I'm not saying I smoked a lot when I was, younger, but we all had our sources, and that's just the kind of way it works. The question is how much faith do you have in the source of the product that you're getting? Yeah. That's one of the nice things about the industrialization of this industry, because the data is absolutely, positively, beyond the shadow of a doubt clear. There are health conditions that are improved with the consumption of cannabis and cannabinoids. The National Science Foundation has a report. Look it up. It's the National Science Foundation report on cannabis and cannabinoids. It's a 700-page document that looks at a comprehensive look, and there's clear evidence to support the use of this. Yeah. Okay. Good scientific peer-reviewed. Now, everyone talks about there's no research in cannabis. Baloney. Okay. There's thousands and thousands of articles. That peer review work may not be getting done in this country, but it's getting done. It's getting published. There's tons of great information out there. You just have to be willing to look for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you talk about, and we have to get to Oura Ring too. When you talk about CBD versus THC, and I believe it's called the entourage effect. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah.
So there's pretty good data. There's good data on this. The Israelis have done a really nice job here. So if you take CBD by itself, it will have a benefit. And this is what, GW Pharmaceuticals just got this approved. It's called Epidiolex. It's been approved for certain forms of epilepsy in this country. So CBD, but when there's CBD with a little bit of THC, and probably the whole plant extract, the terpene extract with that, it creates what's called entourage effect, where 1 + 1 = 3. So try the CBD if you feel like you need some more. And if you're in a medical state, that's a reason to go get a license, because 95% of the people that use cannabis as medicine use it for pain. All of these states have pain qualifications. In the state of Florida, a third of the recommendations are for pain, a third of them are for post-traumatic stress, and a third of them are what's called kind and like conditions, which is probably anxiety or sleep or something like that. Because when you have pain, you have anxiety, you have sleep, which, that's that evil circle that goes on. So that's a reason to say, well, maybe I need to get a license to try this. I don't think you smoke medicine. Okay, that's a big statement, but I have all the respect in the world. I live in this condo, and we go down by our pool, and we've got a pretty cool group here that lives here. And there's this one guy that sits here and smokes cigars all night. Yeah. Okay, he loves cigars. He loves that experience. Who am I to say no? He gets it. Okay, yeah. And I think, and wine is lost on me. Okay. My wife loves figuring out the good, what she likes, what she doesn't like. Me, I like sangria. Put my wine with some juice and some fruit and some ice, and that's kind of wine for me. Right. So I get that appreciation, that connoisseur approach that comes with the flower and the high THC stuff. I get that. And more power to you. But if you're using this from a supplemental standpoint, or from a little bit more of a traditional medical standpoint, there's great extracts. There's great ways to consume this, whether the extracted oils and how that works. It's far more approachable now than what it was before we had all these. And I know we're running late. I want to tell you another really good story.
Well, go for it, man.
So I first get down there. So we're in June. We're over in Palm Beach at the Breakers, which is this fancy schmancy, resort over in Palm Beach. And we're at the Florida Interventional Pain Specialist Conference. And so we've got our booth there. We're talking, and this little medical assistant comes up, and she's Jamaican. And she starts talking to us, and she says, we used to grow this in my backyard. And I said, well, tell me about this. And she says, yeah, my parents would take it and soak it in our finest rum. Now, she didn't say we smoked it, we soaked it in rum. They soaked it in their finest rum. She made a point to point that out, so it was important. And she said they would take it, and they would take the plant out, and it would look green or yellow, and they would save it. And she said when I would have menstrual pains, they would give me a shot of this in my orange juice, and it solved it. And she says my father was a farmer, and he would come home, and he would rub this on his knees and it would help his pain. Now, this was a huge breakthrough for me when I heard her tell the story, because two things. Number one, the plant does not produce THC. The plant produces THCA. It produces a carboxylated version of the acid. Okay, it's THC acid. When you heat it up, it decarboxylates, and that's when it becomes psychologically active, okay, and becomes intoxicating. So when you take a look at this plant historically, it wasn't about THC. It was about THCA. And you take a look about it, and the CBD comes out in the CBDA format too. So I think as this matures as a product for health and wellness, I think you're going to see people leaning more towards the non-psychoactive portion of the plant. You know, right now these markets open up, and this is what people are going after. And listen, I go into these medical clinics and I see very, very ill people who are just looking for some relief.
Yes.
And you know what? If they light up and get some relief, then God bless them. Because the stuff they're dealing with is, you know, they shouldn't have to become zombies on opioids or on any other things, okay, the barbiturates. So, you know, I'm like, great. You know, I'm not going to argue that at all. And when I see a Vietnam veteran, you know, again, thinking about trauma, you're thrown into a snake pit. When you're in Vietnam, there's a snake pit. You have a threat around you all the time. Mm-hmm. You become incredibly hypervigilant. Okay. The anandamide drops in the amygdala. You become hypervigilant. And what we learned from some of our research stuff is that doesn't normalize. Okay. That's your regular state from that point. So no wonder these Vietnam vets smoke so much pot. Okay. That was the only tool they had to normalize from the hypervigilance. And you know, I've been in clinics where I see these guys come in and they're talking about, you know, the stuff I'm using isn't working. And the doctor's like, well, you need to get your CBD levels up, because a lot of these CBD levels have been bred out of the high THC strains. And it's the Charlotte's Web story and things like that that's bringing the CBD really back into the mainstream. So that story of that Jamaican medical assistant was really important to me. And again, when you look at topicals, when you look at topical application of these, it's really, really impressive how well they work.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we wrap up, let's bring it back to Oura Ring.
Okay. So we were talking about First Beat, and we were talking about Elite HRV.
Yep.
One of the best tools I've been able to work with. I really like Oura Ring. Oura Ring not only gave me a very dependable resting RMSSD. Mm-hmm. You know, there's I didn't have that luck with Whoop. You've seen Whoop, and they had a nice marketing program, and I'll tell you, Whoop's algorithms were solid. Okay, their prediction models were good. Their HRV data just was junk.
Yeah.
Okay. So you know, and I think it was more of a marketing thing for them. They can say, yeah, we do this and we have HRV. Well, I never had the success with HRV with their product. Oura Ring had a lot of success. And the friction is incredibly low. This ring you slide on, it goes 2 or 3 days before a charge. Great app. So if you're looking at trying to dashboard yourself, a strong recommendation for me for Oura Ring, or if you want to do it simple, if you got a chest transmitter, use Elite HRV. You know, both of those work really well.
Yeah, I like I haven't. Oura Ring's next for me. So I tried Whoop, tried a lot of different ones. So I think Oura is going to be the winner because it's that friction point, right? You know, the Mega Way, I had to sit in bed for 5 minutes every morning, right? Trying to stay calm, but I knew I had 1,000 things to do. That's my own psychosis. Dude, Don, this is great. This is really
my
good.
pleasure.
Yeah, I think I like to formulate it because this everything's changing so fast with the legislation passing, and you know, I'm actually in Montana right now. I move around.
Oh, cool.
And, you know, I just applied for my medical situation here. So I was shocked. I'm like, oh, wow, even Montana. But this also has some of the, I think
Oklahoma has medical.
Yeah, it's happening quickly, right? Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, Montana has one of the largest percentages of vets too.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
So I think it's a big thing here as well. But I would like to, maybe in a few months' time this year, when things keep changing, maybe we could get you back on again, an update on what's going on.
Sure. Yeah. Like, I'm not the legislative guy. I'm the human performance guy. Now, so happy to talk. And I sure hope by that time I've learned more and can explain more. Right now I've got a fairly good, I'm pretty comfortable with the role of the molecules in the central nervous system at a synaptic level. Mm-hmm. I want to start to do a deeper dive into the enteric nervous system. What's going on with leaky gut? What's going on with the biome? Where does CBD have a role there? We know that if you consume THC orally and it goes to your stomach into the liver, it turns to 11-hydroxy and gets 5 times stronger. Okay, so it's a reason edibles are such a challenge for people. We also know that in CBD does that same pathway, it gets cut to 20% bioavailability. Okay, so if you're using CBD, you should be taking it translingual, transdermal, vaping, something like that. But edible, you've got to boost your levels by 5 times to keep the same bioavailability.
Yeah, good to know.
So I want to understand, the role of CBD in the gut, the role, and also understand there's something to understand the role of THC as it relates to cancer. There's a lot of different cancers. There's a lot of different things. This plant, again, we said it earlier, it can be considered snake oil, but one of the reasons it works on so many things is because it's so effective in the CNS. Okay, so, and a lot of our illnesses are CNS driven. When you look at pain, of all the things it's been researched for, I think there was like 48 different conditions it's been researched for. Over half of them were pain related. So, that makes sense. I want to start to dig in and get deeper on my understanding of this as a tool in the treatment of cancer, in the treatment of cell death, and how that works. But there's a lot of work to be done here.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's your wealth of information, man. And I learned a lot today. And like I said, I'm not naive. So I'm hoping a lot of people have learned a lot today as well. And I think, the science behind it is really the big part that people need to start understanding, because there's so much to learn. I would love to hear about, what you find out about gut biomes and how that relation is, because that's something that I think is a huge opportunity for our society to move forward as far as health, because we're just scratching the surface, right, of gut biome. And
it's literally Mars.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's how far and how much we have to learn. It's Mars.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, it's going to be a big project.
Where do people find you, man?
So if you Google me, my social media is strong enough. I think I come up at the top, but the easiest place to find me is LinkedIn, Don Moxley. I'm on About Me. So about.me/Don Moxley. Mm-hmm. Those are 2 great landing places. I'm not a social media machine. I have social media. I'm looking at Facebook less and less. I'm mainly looking at tattoos and sport training stuff on Instagram.
Do you have tattoos?
I love tattoos. I love body art.
Yeah. I'm getting my first one in May.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
I freaking love body art.
Yeah.
So I'm not, you can find me there, and I've got Don Moxley on most of them.
Yeah.
Twitter, I'm Don Moxley on Twitter, but if you want to get me, LinkedIn, this podcast will wind up on my profile at LinkedIn, and my other stuff's already up there. So
awesome.
Which reminds me, I need to get Ben's up there too. I haven't put that up there yet.
Yeah, I'll remind you.
Okay.
Yeah, right on. And ladies and gentlemen, Don Moxley, thanks for coming on.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Hey, fitness fans, don't leave yet. It's your host, Eric Malzone, and I have a quick favor to ask. Actually, 3 favors. So, number 1, if you're a fan of our show, I ask you to do something that takes under 3 minutes. Go to iTunes, please, and subscribe to our show. Please, please, please. It means so much to us. It's so important. And then give us a favorable review. We would really, really appreciate it. And I can't tell you how much it means and helps us out. So I know it takes 2 minutes of your day, and it means a lot to us. So please do that. Number 2, go to our YouTube channel, our Fitness Marketing Alliance, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel there. Number 3, if you like this episode or any of the episodes that we've released, share it on social. That's huge. That's a big deal for us. And we put a lot of work into these episodes, trying to give you great actionable content for the fitness industry. So that would mean a lot. And that's it. So we have some big plans coming up for this show. I'll be talking about that in the next couple episodes, but thank you so much for listening. It means so much. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I love to hear from everybody. Eric, ERIC @fitnessmarketingalliance.com.